Good evening. Welcome to Photo Mentor TV. Tonight I'm going to give you the straight scoop on 5 pieces of advice you might hear from others or read on Facebook and that you might want to ignore. Good evening. This is episode number 78 of Photo Mentor TV. Glad you're here. I am Lee Love, and you will hope you'll enjoy tonight's show. Let's see here. The purpose of the show is to educate, encourage, and mentor mainly new photographers, but of course anyone. And if this is your first time here, we do this every every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, or if you're in other parts of the world, it would be 0100 Universal Coordinated Time, or UTC. So anyway, glad you could join us. Got a couple of quick announcements here, and then we are going to get rolling. Again, tonight's subject is photography myths and misconceptions, misinformation, and I think you'll find this pretty interesting. A couple of quick announcements again. If you have not been following along, we have had a contest for giving away some free coaching. I don't know if you guys are aware of this or not, but last month I decided to try and help get you started on the right foot for the New Year's 2022. And so I was going to give away 4 coaching sessions. So you had to register for that, of course. We had a great turnout. I'm really excited and looking forward to it. But I want to let you guys be aware that to be able to qualify or to be eligible, I do need some information from you. It's not my requirement. It's a legal issue on knowing like what part, if you live outside the U.S. and what state you live in, make sure you're over 18, that kind of thing. But anyway, and so I sent out an email to the winners. I was hoping to announce their names tonight, but until I get confirmation from them and their eligibility, I can't do that. But that means that if they don't respond by Friday night, this Friday, February 18th, at midnight Eastern Time, then I will move on to the next 4 people that qualified or that were selected at random. So anyway, want to let you know about that. I also want to welcome Taylor, who is our newest Facebook member. I think she might be here tonight. I hope so. But if not, thanks for joining us. I think you're going to enjoy both the show and also the work we do in the Facebook group. Great group of people. You can't ask for a better group of people that want to help and encourage each other. The other announcement I want to make is that I'm working on, if you remember last week, the show is about outdoor lighting, and I have one more video to edit in that series. But once that's done, I'm going to move on to the next project, which is a Lightroom intro course. Now, for those of you who've been around, you might remember I did one last year about the same time. I'm going to update it and do another one coming up here shortly. And so that will be a free workshop that you're welcome to join in on. If you want to be notified of that, though, you need to go, and if you're not already registered on the site or in our group or somehow we have your email. If you didn't get an email tonight, in other words, notifying you of the course or of the show, then you might want to register. And you can do that. The easiest way to do that is go to photomentor.tv, and then that will direct you to the Photo Mentor Academy site, which is right here if you want to go, or you can just go to photomentoracademy.com. Scroll down to the bottom there. There's a simple form, name, and email, and we'll notify you as soon as the Lightroom course is available. Let's see. And the last thing is, hey, if you find this information useful, the stuff we do here every Tuesday night, again, we've got about 85 episodes or so, They're not all live, but this is show 78. Hey, listen, appreciate your support. You know, you can put a check in the mail for $50,000, make it out to Lee Love. If you don't have that kind of money, well then, hey, just subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's pretty much the same thing, I think. So anyway, okay, let's get rolling here. So tonight, again, I mentioned before that we're going to be talking about myths, misconceptions, and misunderstandings about photography topics. Now, the person you have to blame for this is Crystal Rivera. Crystal's in our group, and she's a terrific photographer. She's really amazing. I can't, she's only been shooting since December, and her lighting stuff is just really fantastic. So anyway, but so I was chatting with Crystal, and we were talking about how frustrated she was about the information she gets from some of these Facebook groups and other things. She'd ask a question, either not get the right answer or just not get any answer, or they would just point her to some YouTube channel. Anyway, the point was she was very frustrated about it. Well, if you guys know me at all, been around, you know how that gets me going. That's really, I can't stand to see bad information repeated and myths. So we started making a list of a number of topics that she felt were ones she wanted me to cover. So these are the top 5. I mean, there's more of them, but these are the top 5 that came out of that discussion that we're going to be talking about tonight. So, okay. So let's get into this a little bit. And then first of all, let me welcome everybody here. And hello, Taylor. It looks like you're happy to be here. So thanks for joining us, Taylor. And let's see, who else? Sue Ann and Allie. Hello, Allie. Allie is our photo mentor, photographer of the month, last month for February. And she's just done, I guess it would be for this month. Yeah, this month, sorry. She's just one of those people just really grown very, very quickly in her photography, and that's one reason that she was selected. So, okay, so let's get moving here a little bit. So, a couple things we're going to talk to you about. Let's see if I can pull this up, make sure I got this right here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is shooting on manual. And those of you that have heard me rant about this before, you know it's a big issue of mine. But it was one of the things I wanted to talk about, and that she brought up as well, because it's very, very common. So the deal is that there's nothing wrong with shooting on manual. Let me start off on that. And I'm going to go into more detail on this. But the problem is, it depends on when you're going to shoot on manual. And the thing I have a problem with is that the myth, I think, is that if for some reason if you shoot on manual, you're going to be a better photographer. And that's just not true. So first of all, when you shoot on manual, let me go over a couple of things that I think you need to know about. When you shoot on manual, one of the problems is that you basically are turning your camera into a dumb 1960s film camera. You're turning off the light meter. And the light meter is really it's the brains of the camera. It determines a lot of things about your exposure. So if you turn off the light meter, then you're kind of in the dark. Okay, you don't really. It makes it very, very difficult. And what I see happening is a lot of people will do this because they're told, oh, you have to shoot on manual, but they're not told why they have to shoot on manual, first of all. And what happens is the camera goes blind when you do that. It has no information. It doesn't know anything about the lighting, the exposure, nothing. And so what happens is you really are guessing your entire exposure when you do that. And so the problem is, you know, you're hurting yourself when you do that. So there are times to shoot on manual, but I believe that the most important thing is when you first start off is to don't worry about exposure. Worry about learning to see, learning to tell a story. That's what's most important, because it doesn't matter whether you're shooting on manual or whatever the mode is. It's all about the emotion of the image. What makes a compelling image is not what mode you shoot it on. It's whether there's emotion built into the image. So, I'm not intending. I don't want to embarrass anybody. It's not my intention, but I want to give you an example. Here's a photo that was shot that someone posted and said, "Hey, can you help me with this? And can you, it's overexposed. Can you help me correct for it?" And then there was another one, and they had shot this. I don't know if they've been hired for this or whatever, but the point was, it was obviously way overexposed, of course, right? And the problem is, I looked at that and I immediately knew that they were getting bad advice. They were told they should shoot on manual. And the reason I knew that is because there's no modern camera that would have overexposed an image this badly. Unless you purposely told it, or there's a problem with the camera, it was defective, or there's something like that. But there's no reason a modern camera would have exposed an image that badly. So there's an example of where I say you're given bad advice. Now, you can say, oh, you got to learn the exposure triangle and all this other stuff, but here's my point. If you're starting off, don't worry about learning to shoot on manual. Learn to worry about your subject, the person in front of you. Again, the sad part about this here is this photo is really, ruined. And of course, the other myth, and I won't go into too much detail here about this, is that I could have predicted what the answer was, what the response was going to be, and that was, oh, did you shoot on RAW? If you shot on RAW, you could have solved it. No, you could not. That would not solve this image. It was way overexposed. It was too blown out. RAW would not have fixed this image. There's another myth I could have added to the list. Shooting on RAW fixes everything. It does not. So my complaint is, if you're just getting started, learn to shoot on auto. There's nothing wrong with shooting on auto. Whatever people are, if you notice, they'll apologize. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm still shooting on auto. I don't care what mode you shoot on. When you shoot on with your iPhone, guess what? You're shooting on auto. And I'll bet your pictures turn out much better than they do if you're shooting on manual and you don't know what you're doing. You're just getting started. So shoot on auto or shoot on aperture priority. Now, aperture priority will allow you to select the opening of the lens, and then the camera will pick the shutter speed, and if you have it on auto ISO, it'll select the ISO. So you're picking one of the three items, and the camera's picking the other two. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I will tell you that I shoot 90% at least on aperture priority. And people are like, well, why? Well, the reason is, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but the opening or the aperture of the lens is what gives me one of my most creative tools. The ability to determine what's in focus, how much. If I'm photographing a group of people, I want a smaller aperture, right? So I get more depth of field, or less depth of field, I guess I should say. No, I want more depth of field. I want more in focus is what I'm trying to get across, okay? Whereas if I'm shooting on something where I want something really creative, or I'm shooting something close up, maybe then I want less depth of field. I want something more out of focus in the background. The landscapes, I want greater depth of field, okay? So the point is, that's why I shoot on aperture priority, because it allows me to determine whether I want that in focus or not. My point in all of this is, don't listen to people that tell you have to shoot on manual. And here's my analogy. If you're a young teenager, if you guys are mothers or fathers out there, and you have a young teenager, would you tell them, hey, now look, I know you're getting ready to get your license, your learner's permit, but before you do that, you have to take the old truck out back that's manual transmission, and you got to drive that first and learn to drive on that. And also you got to learn to change the oil in that truck. No, before we're going to teach you the rules of the road, that doesn't make sense. So what you need to do is learn composition, learn lighting, learn how to see, learn how to tell a story first, then worry about exposure triangle, worry about shooting on manual, etc., etc. So anyway, that's my rant about shooting on manual. Again, there is a place to shoot on manual, and there's a time to shoot on manual, and I do shoot on manual once in a while, and that has to do with if I'm in a studio, okay, and I'm using strobes. Well, my light's not going to change. I want to lock in those exposure on those strobes, and so therefore I don't want the light to change. Plus, the light meter in the camera does not respond to strobe lights. So it doesn't do any good to have a light meter turned on, okay, because I'm not using the light meter to measure the strobes. I'm using an external light meter to do that. So there are times to shoot on manual, but most of the time, if you're just starting out, you don't want to do that. The other time to shoot on manual is when you know the exposure already. Well, here's one thing you can do. If you really want to shoot on manual, first go to Aperture Priority or Auto, take a picture, look at the image, look at what's called the EXIF data, look at what the camera says is the exposure, then dial those exact same settings into the camera on manual, and now the camera will be fine because the camera's decided here's the exposure should be. I know what the lighting's going to be. I know it's not going to and then go to manual so it doesn't change. Okay? The other myth that I want to get rid of is that manual somehow makes your images better looking, more whatever. I don't know what the stupid answer is, but that's not true. And the reason is a properly exposed image is exactly the same if it's shot on manual or auto. In other words, f8 at 1/25th of a second at ISO 200 is exactly the same on auto as it is on manual. Nothing's going to be any different. And if you don't believe me, try it. Shoot an image, look at what the exposure is. Don't move the camera, of course, because if you move it, then you're going to be changing the lighting. Then dial those same settings in, shoot it on manual, and you're going to get the exact same picture. So don't try and worry about shooting on manual to start off. Worry about your subject. I have many students that tell me, hey Lee, why is it my iPhone photos are better than my DSLR? And the reason is you totally ignored the technology. You're not worried about the technology. You're worried more about the subject than the photo, and that's the same thing you need to be doing if you have a fancier camera. Okay. See if I left out anything. I think that's pretty much it. Sue-Ann, we have any questions, comments, or anything like that you want me to answer? I don't think so. I think we're good here. Let's see. Yep, and I agree. Taylor says, whoops, sorry. Taylor says that that she uses Aperture Priority as well. And I agree. It's the same thing that I do most of the time, and it works just fine. There's no reason to change or do anything other than that for most part. Okay. Let's see. Any other questions? Starting out here. Another one here by Taylor Swishu. Starting out, I like to use auto, and then at settings after that, learn the best way exposure. Yeah, look, if you understand that stuff, that's great, and there's nothing wrong with you need to know the exposure triangle eventually. I certainly agree with that. I'm not saying don't know that, but you also have to realize that it's not the end all be all, and I think that's the problem that I have is that so many people that's their advice is, oh, you just have to shoot on manual, and that solves everything, and it doesn't. Okay. Okay. All right. So, okay, so Taylor says, on topic of manual, does the same apply for speed lights, TTL versus manual? That's a great question, Taylor. Thank you. It depends. First of all, I encourage you to go back and look at last week's show, because that was all about lighting. It was a demo of lighting, but also it depends on the situation. So first of all, let me tell you, I'm not a big fan of TTL in flash photography, and here's why. I don't like when things make decisions for me, and that's the problem sometimes. So let's say, for example, I've got my camera set up, I'm using strobes, and I got my exposure set, and it's fine. And then I move just a little bit, and there's a window maybe, or something. Maybe you're doing real estate photography. There's an example where manual might make sense, or at least manual on the strobe. So what happens is when you move, the camera sees more light. It then sends a signal to the strobe via TTL saying, hey, I got more light, dial down the strobe. Well, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want the strobe to stay exactly the same. So what I will do is sometimes I will start on TTL. I'll take a shot on TTL, let the flash figure out what it thinks it needs to be setting. It's talking to the camera. Then I'll go over to the flash and change it to manual and leave the flash on manual so it doesn't change. And then I will go from then on. It just depends. I like to have complete control, and especially in a multi-light situation, it's much better, I think, to be able to control the lighting individually. Now, most of the lights I have, I can control from the camera position, so that's good. So I was trying to photograph a bird in flight example. Would I use shutter priority or sport mode? Okay, great question. Just saying anything. I recognize that photo. I don't think that's who you are. Anyway, well, the thing is, believe it or not, sport mode is the same thing as shutter priority. Most people don't realize that when you put your camera in sport mode, it tells the camera, hey, they're more interested in freezing the action, so therefore put this camera in shutter priority. So it does exactly the same thing, actually. Sport mode will tell the camera to basically go to shutter priority, and it will try and pick the fastest shutter speed it can given the amount of light. Now the nice thing is it will kind of do that automatically, but it will try and look based on the light and pick the highest shutter speed it can do in sport mode. In shutter priority, then you're manually setting that, and that's the difference there. Let's see, what's this one say? Hang on one second here. Let me fix this a little bit. It's a little hard to read. Okay. Let's see. In film days, manual wasn't truly manual. You selected either an f-stop shutter speed, and it used exposure. Yeah, I mean, there in film days there was something called the Sunny F16 rule, and that was the closest thing we got to auto. In other words, you look outside. There was a formula to say, okay, hey, it looks pretty sunny. There's a lot of light outside, and you would just basically you'd look at the ISO of your film, and you basically set your film to your shutter aperture at f16 and your shutter speed to about the same thing as your ISO of your film. So it's 1/25th versus 100, that kind of a thing. But it was the problem with film is we didn't have a choice. Everything was manual, really. I mean, we didn't have even the older camera didn't have autofocus, so you were really, really trying to do it then. So it was either manual or shutter priority, and that was pretty much it. And that was even later when they came out with newer cameras. So anyway, great questions. Thanks, guys. Okay, so let's keep moving on here. So the next myth has to do with never go over ISO 100 or 200. In other words, always shoot on the lowest ISO setting possible. Now, that's partially true. Okay, there is a reason to shoot at a lower ISO, and the reason is you get a little better color. You're going to get what's called a native ISO. The camera's going to work pretty well at that. You're going to get really good vibrant color, as I said. But that is a little bit of a holdover from film days. Again, you got to remember, in that day we only had what was called ASA, but it's the same thing, ISO. And the thing is, once you put a roll of film in your camera, let's say it was ASA 400, you were stuck at ASA 400. You didn't have a choice. But nowadays you can, of course, change and go and change the camera all the thing you want. But here's where the problem comes in. The problem comes in is that everybody's really paranoid about noise, ISO noise. Don't shoot over 200. Oh, I don't want to go over 400. I don't want to go over 800 because I'm going to get noise. Here's the truth, and I know you guys won't believe this, but trust me, I have been doing this a long time. I have never, ever had a client, and I deal with a lot of ad agencies and big clients, ever complain about noise. They don't see it. It's not even there. It's a photographer thing. Only photographers see this. You can go on Facebook and people will complain, oh, it's a kind of noisy image. Who cares? Nobody freaking cares about noise. What they care about is, again, does the image, is it compelling? Does it have emotion? Does it, I mean, how many times have you seen pictures and people go, oh, this is great, I love this picture, and you're looking at it going, oh my gosh, I can't believe it doesn't, it's this, it's that, I need to change this, and you're thinking that it's awful because it doesn't have some technical aspect that you need, and it's just not the truth. Clients generally don't care. In fact, I'll make a prediction to you. If you haven't been shooting very long, now here's something you'll find that's going to drive you really crazy. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I see it over and over again. And they do it, every one of my clients says, it doesn't matter who they are. I'm going to talk about a magazine. I'll submit 12 images to a magazine, and they will always pick the one you hate the most. And they'll always pick the one that's not the one that you selected. I don't know why, and I've talked with other photographers. It's exactly the same thing. It always seems to work that way. So that goes to show you they're not going to pick the one care about noise or anything like that. They just don't care. Now, there's some other aspects of that, and that is nowadays modern cameras have amazing ISO performance. Like the Nikon D500, I think the native ISO is 51,400 or something like that, 800. And it will go up to 100,638. Okay, the Sony A7S, which is also considered a very, very good low light camera, will go up to 400,000. Got the comma in the wrong place there, don't I? Or is it 4 million maybe? I don't know. It could be 4 million. I forgot. I have to look at that now. But the point, here's what I'm seeing going on over and over again. These cameras are getting better and better. And then, I mean, I've seen images out of the Nikon D500, for example, at ISO 10,000. And I couldn't even see any noise in an ISO image at 10,000. So what the problem is that people are just overly paranoid about noise, and you really need to forget about that. It's not going to. So here's the other thing. I see a lot of people that have blurry pictures. Camera shake is what's causing it. And and I'll say, well, show me the EXIF data, and I'll look at the image, and they're shooting at maybe, I don't know, ISO 400, but their shutter speed is 1/60th of a second. In other words, they will sacrifice what they think is noise for blurry pictures. So here's a rule of thumb. You want to be shooting at twice the focal length as for your shutter speed. So for example, if you're shooting a 50mm lens, handheld by the way, this is only handheld, just, all bets are off on if you're doing this over on with a tripod. But so if you're shooting a 50mm lens, you want to be shooting at least, in your handheld, be shooting at least 1/25th of a second. If you're shooting a 200mm lens, you want to be shooting at least twice that, which would be 400 or 6/40th of a second. 300 millimeter, 640th of a second. You see what I'm saying? So you want to be, that's, now, if you can go faster, that's even better. But to get, and that assumes you have relatively good technique and hand holding. But the thing is, you want, that's what causes blur. 90% of the time I see images that are soft. That's why. So, but to be able to shoot at 640th of a second or faster, or 1,000th of a second, you have to be shooting at a high shutter ISO range when you don't have a lot of light. Now you got the lens wide open. That's not going to do any good. Okay, the only other thing you can do then is add some light and flash. That's a whole nother discussion. But the point is, if I'd rather deal with blurry or with noisy images than I would with blurry images. You can fix noise. All right, there's all kinds of algorithms. There's all kinds of software that does amazing job on fixing noise, if noise is really the problem. But if the image is blurry, you're just stuck. There's nothing you can do about it. Okay, so please, if you have to shoot at, ISO 51,000, then do it. Okay. Okay, so does this apply to zoom lenses as length? Yes, it does, Allie. It sure does. So it doesn't matter. So if you're on a zoom lens, let's say you're at, maybe you have a lens that's a 70 to 200. Okay. So if you're zoomed all the way out wide, then 70 millimeters, then you want to be shooting at about twice that. 1/25th, maybe a little faster than that, 200th of a second if you can get there. But if you zoom in, and you to 200, then you need to double and up your shutter speed. So here's an analogy. It may not be a very good one, but think of it this way: if you have a laser, okay, and you're aiming this laser at a wall or something, say you're aiming it at your hand. Your hand is really close. You're not going to see much movement at all. That thing could move a little bit, and you'll just see the laser move just a hair, right? But if you're aiming this on a wall 30 feet away, every little millimeter, centimeter is going to look like about a foot of movement. And that's what happens with a long lens. The longer the lens, the more exaggerated that movement is. And that's why. Now, I will tell you that the newer lenses, and cameras, have image stabilization, and that will help. So you sometimes can get away with using not twice the focal length because the cameras compensate for that some if you can, but it's always a good rule of thumb. So the longer lenses will have image stabilization, and that's what the intended purpose of them are. Okay. Thought I had another slide on this. Let me make sure I didn't. I guess I didn't. Something. Oh, I want to mention something about. Oh, I guess that's it. Yeah. So you can fix blur, but you can't fix. All right, you can fix noise, but you can't fix blur. That's the comment I want to make. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. The next myth is that flash is only for bad lighting. Now, I see this a lot, people that, hey, I'm photographing a wedding, or I got to do a birthday party or whatever, and I need to get a flash. Well, flash is something you can use anytime you photograph. Now, I've said this before. You guys have heard me say, I light everything I shoot. I'm going to give you some examples here in a minute. And I light everything, and the reason is it gives me complete control. But the one of the myths I love is that when people say, well, I'm just a natural light photographer. Now, I'm not here to make fun of anybody. That's not my point. You guys know that. But it's code for I'm afraid of flash and I don't know how it works. And so that's the problem. If you're a natural light photographer, there's nothing wrong with being a natural light photographer, but you must learn how to use flash photography as well, because you're going to be in a situation sometime where you can't always do natural light. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. Let me bring this up. Let's see. I think it's okay. You guys tell me. All right. Does that look like a flash photo, or does it look like available light? Okay. Well, the answer is it's both. I shot that in July, not recently, but on a July afternoon, the middle of the day. It was the hottest day of the year, and guess what? It's lit. There's an assistant walking to the right with a strobe light, okay, and that fills it. But because the strobe was mixed at a 50-50, meaning half, it was not up too much, it was just enough to fill in the shadows, it doesn't look lit. So you can still do lighting without making something look like it was, deer in the headlights. There's another one. This is an ad I shot for a company, all right? And this was using 2 strobes, 500 watt seconds each, full power, to fill in the shadows. Now, if you look at the bottom there, below the shadow behind them, below them, you'll see there's some pretty dark shadows there. That's what their faces would have looked like if I hadn't filled it in with strobe. So what I did on this one is I purposely underexposed the background because I wanted that nice deep blue sky, and then I filled it with flash. Now, it doesn't look lit. I don't think it looks lit. I think it looks pretty natural. And it really makes a huge difference. And I agree with you, Taylor. I mean, it takes a while. It's a little scary. I get that flash photography is not obvious, but I'm telling you, once you start learning how to use it, it will totally change your light. And the other cool thing about it, Taylor, is you can do an awful lot with just one light. So you don't have to have a whole bunch of lights. I don't think I have one here with 2 lights, but just or with 1 light. Okay, so here's another one. This was another photo I did for a magazine. It was at the World War II Memorial here in D.C. The gentleman, I put him against this blue sky. They wanted to see the World War II Memorial, and you can tell the light behind him, and then I filled it with a strobe, and it filled in perfectly. Now, it looks lit, but it's not obvious. It doesn't look, I don't think it looks too badly lit. Okay. Here's one that is studio lit, of course, and so there's one that's a little more intense. All right. And I think that's the last one here. Let me see. Of the lighting scenario. Yes. Okay. So you can see that lighting makes a huge difference in your photography. And so the myth about being a natural light photographer or about someone or about only using flash when it's for a situation where you don't have light, again, indoors, that is totally a myth. You can use it any time, as you can see. And as you also can see, flash can look very natural. It doesn't have to look like it's, deer in the headlights. But the other myth is that flash is hard or it's scary or it's difficult. It's not. It's also not expensive. There's a lot of things out nowadays. You can get some amazing lighting systems for not a lot of money. And it's also not that hard. It just needs to be, you got to start with 1 light, practice, and a little bit of education there. It's something I went over a lot of this in the session, this show last week. So look at that. I'll put the link in the show notes. And the other thing is that people don't seem to realize is that if you're able to control your lighting, it will save you tons of time in post-processing. Okay? Because as you could see from the photo I showed you before that was totally blown out, all the advice was, oh, you got to shoot in RAW. Oh, I can fix it in post-processing. I can Lightroom, Photoshop. Why? If you'd have just controlled the manual exposure a little bit, put it back on aperture priority, and use a bit of flash on these situations, you would be amazed what you can do with that. Okay, so the number 3 issue is flash photography for bad lighting is totally false. There's no reason you can't use flash anytime you want. Okay, so let's talk about resolution and about cameras and about some things I call pixel peeping. So one of the problems I see a lot of times is people will take their cameras or their images, they'll post them on Facebook, and they'll zoom in on them and they'll say, look how soft this image is. It's out of focus or it's noisy. But here's something you need to think about. First of all, when you take an image and you zoom it in at 100 or 200%, that is not realistic, okay? No one is going to come up and look at your image that closely and go, oh wow, look, it's got noise. Plus, I'm going to give you some stuff about monitors. The other thing is, so here's a test. Do this. Walk over to your TV and get right up to it and look at it and put your face right as close as you can focus. And I'll tell you what, I don't care if you got a 4K TV or an 8K TV, you're going to see little dots. They're called pixels, and that's what makes up the picture. Every device has pixels, electronic device at least. So you're going, if you zoom in at 100 or 200%, you are going to see noise, as you call it, or a grain, as you think it might be. But the fact is, that's just part of the picture. All right? No one is ever going to see, no one's going to look at an image that way. All right? So here's the other thing that most people don't realize, is that if you print your photos, you're also going to find that they will not look noisy, because printing, it will hide a lot of that. So if you think your images are noisy or there's a problem with them, print one of them and you'll see they look pretty darn good. All right. The other thing is, you're not looking at a print like this. A print is going to be 15 feet away or hanging on a wall, maybe further. Okay. So it's going to look, you wouldn't look at a billboard and go look at a billboard like that and go, oh gosh, look how the big dots they printed that with. No, because it's looked at a distance. So you have to remember the viewing distance a subject is going to be looked at when you're talking about whether you're zoomed in. But the problem is you can't zoom in on a picture 100 or 200% and think it's going to look normal. Now, here's the other myth people don't realize, a misconception, I guess this would be. Do you realize that a HD monitor, 1080 or 1920 by 1080, is only capable of resolving 2 megapixels? Okay? A 4K image, 4K monitor, is only a 8 megapixel image. So if, let's say you have an HD monitor, you're zooming in on an image that can only resolve up to 2 megapixels. You see what I'm talking about here? So let's say you get a modern camera. Any modern camera is anywhere from 18 to 24 megapixels, even a moderately priced one. So if you're looking at it on a 1080 or 1920 by 1080 monitor, the monitor's only capable of resolving up to 2 megapixels. Well, you're displaying at what? A 6 times or something, is that what it'd be? Okay, resolution. Your camera is already way more, I guess it would be 12 times for a HD image. 12 times resolution of what the image is there, what the monitor is capable of resolving. So there's no way an HD monitor is going to look right when you zoom in on your images. Now, let's say you have a 4K monitor. Again, prices have come down. Those are still only 8 megapixels. Okay? I realized I just misspelled megapixel here, didn't I? There's an A missing in there. Anyway, so even an 8 megapixel image, and your camera's a 24 megapixel camera or higher, okay, then it still can't resolve your images. So again, you're trying to make judgments on these images at a resolution that the monitor cannot show you. So it's always going to be less quality than the image itself. Does that make sense? I don't know if you guys understand that or not. But I know it's kind of geeky, but it's something that a lot of people don't think about when they're looking at an image on their monitor. They're going, why does it look so noisy? Why is it out of focus? Why is it so soft? Well, part of the reason, maybe it may be soft, okay, maybe noisy, but chances are the problem is that the image you're looking at, the monitor cannot resolve the image anyway. So it's never going to look 100%, so to speak. All right, so the monitor cannot resolve the resolution of modern cameras. Now, here's another thing you guys probably don't know. This is a big one. Let's see, this would be under misinformation, maybe. I don't know, maybe misconceptions. Could be all of them. Who knows? Do you realize that a raw image is not an image? A raw file is data. It is not a photo. So you're like, yeah, I know that, Lee. No, think about this for a second. It's like trying to look at a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet without having Word or Excel. If you open it up in a text editor, you're just going to get a bunch of gibberish, right? Okay. But it gets worse than that. Do you realize that there is no way to display a raw image? That when you look at a raw image on Lightroom or on your phone, well, you can't look at it on your phone, but on your camera even, on the back of the camera, that you're not looking at the raw image? Do you realize that there is a tiny embedded JPEG in every raw image, and that's what you're looking at? That the camera generates a JPEG so you can view the image. Because otherwise you couldn't look at it, because there is no image in a raw file. It's just data. Alright? I know this is, again, I know I'm getting a little geeky here. I apologize, but it's important to understand. So, there are two ways to look at a raw image. Number one, because everybody says, oh, shoot in raw. Okay. Well, that's fine, but you're not looking at the full resolution. What you're looking at is, there are two ways. One is the embedded raw or embedded JPEG in the raw file. That's the first thing. Or, if you're looking at Lightroom, have you ever noticed that when you import an image, it generates what's called a preview? And you can set the resolution of that preview, standard resolution or higher resolution. That is a JPEG that's created from the data in the raw file. So once again, you're not looking at the raw file. You're looking at a JPEG that was what's called kind of, in the video editing world, a proxy. You're not really looking at the actual file. You're looking at a mirror image or a copy of that file that's a smaller resolution. So my point is, you're not, I can have my camera D850 is a 47 megapixel camera. I'm not looking at a 47 megapixel JPEG or raw file. I'm looking at a JPEG that's a representation of that file. And so when I make an adjustment in Lightroom, it's showing me roughly an approximation of what the file is going to look like, but it won't know until it actually outputs it, converts it, or prints it. And then it takes that data and converts it to one of those other formats. But you are never looking at raw data. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but my point of all of this is, when you start stressing about resolution and zooming in at 200%, the reason you're not seeing it is because it's not there. You're not able to view it. You don't have a 24 megapixel monitor. Okay? So you're always going to be looking at a representation of that data. So just keep that in mind. So that's one of the myths and misconceptions that really drives me nuts when people talk about their cameras, or they're zooming in or looking at this thing at 200% and they're like, look at how noisy it is. Well, of course it is. You're looking at it within a couple of inches. That's not the way to evaluate an image. So anyway, all right. Let's see here. We got any other questions before I move on here? Yeah, I don't know why Mike. I got him to shut off comments from Mike, and he's always he never watches on YouTube. He always watches on LinkedIn. I like it that he does it. It's nice, but we don't see the questions when he asks that question. When you ask a question, Mike. Okay. All right. So the other question is. So let's look a little bit at full frame versus crop sensor cameras. So one of the myths is you have to have a full frame camera. You can't use crop sensor. There's a whole bunch of things there, which I'll go over. But the point is, a lot of people put down crop sensors. And so let me give you a little history on it. The reason that crop sensor cameras were developed in the first place is because when they first came out, the sensor technology was very, very expensive to produce. So by making the sensor smaller, that reduced the price, and they could get the product in the hands of more consumers. It also, though, allowed them to make the lenses smaller, because if the lens doesn't have to cover such a large area, i.e. the sensor, then they can make the lens smaller and less expensive. So that's the reason why crop sensors existed. Of course, a point and shoot is a crop sensor camera, and your phone is a crop sensor camera, right? It's smaller than a 35 millimeter camera. So that's kind of where the history of the sensor technology came from. Now, one of the things people will always tell you is when you're looking for a camera and they're like, oh, you know, I'm shooting in low light or whatever, they're always going to tell you it's not capable of shooting in low light. It's not necessarily true, because again, that was fine that was true when crop sensor cameras first came out, and it's true to some extent. You know, there's some truth to it, because in some ways, because think about it, the real estate, if the sensor is bigger, they can put more pixels on there, what's called photo sites on there. And because they can put more photo sites on there, then the photo sites are bigger around, which means they can store more light, which means that's where the noise comes from, is because the capability of light is when the photo sensor is too small. So there's some truth to that, but think about it this way. It also has to do with back to resolution. In other words, a 47 megapixel camera is not going to have the same low light capability as, let's say, a lower resolution crop sensor camera. I used the D500 as an example before. The D500 is a crop sensor camera. I think it's 16 megapixels. And it's got amazing low light. Like I said, 10,000 ISO. I've seen images that look fantastic. So it's not even full frame. But because it has less resolution and because it's a sports camera, they've done some things to improve the noise, and even though it's not full frame, okay? So the fact that people say that a camera has to be full frame to get low noise, or excuse me, get low light, is not necessarily true. There's a lot of things that contribute to it. One of the other things that people are going to tell you is that you get more zoom range with a crop sensor camera. Well, that's not exactly true either. And what that I'll kind of show you what I mean by that. So you're not zooming in, okay? It's kind of a misnomer. Let's see if I can show you an example of this, what I'm talking about. So here's one. Here's a picture right here. Okay, so if you look at this picture right here, okay, this is the center part is a crop sense, where the crop is, and the outside white is for full frame, 35 millimeter. Now, but if you notice, it's not zooming in, it's just cutting some of the edges off. In other words, you're losing some of the stuff on the bottom. Look at the trees on the bottom. Look at the mountain on the top. So that means you either have to move closer or back up to get the same frame that you would in a full frame sensor. So it's a little bit of a misnomer because people keep saying, "Oh, you get more magnification." It's not magnification. You're not getting magnification. It's cropping the frame is the way it works, and that is the fact of why this look. Now, the other thing that's interesting is when people I'll show you one here. So this is an example of a full frame versus other sensor size. So the top one left is full frame. That's a 35 millimeter. The second one over to the yellow one over right, APS-C, that's a standard crop sensor, 1.5 times less. It's a little smaller sensor. They go down smaller net. The one at probably the bottom, the one in 3.2 is probably an iPhone kind of sensor. So yes, the sensors are smaller, which means, as I said before, the amount of resolution or the amount of the photo sites, the size of the photo sites are going to be smaller. But also remember, I think what an iPhone is 12 megapixels. You're like, well, wait a minute, my iPhone's 12 megapixels. Isn't that the same as a 12 megapixel full frame or crop sensor camera? No, it's not. And the reason is the megapixels may be fine. They crop that information, they cram more information in there, but the photo sites themselves are a little bit smaller. So anyway, that's the deal. Now, here's the other interesting thing. Well, I'm going to save this because I got some more I want to tell you about. All right, so that's the first thing. You're not getting more zoom. What you're doing is you're getting more crop. Now, here's another thing. If you're a landscape photographer, you actually in some ways want a crop sensor camera. Like, well, wait a minute. I was always told that it's hard to get wide angle lenses for landscape cameras. Well, that's not true either. I mean, Sigma makes a 10 to 20 millimeter lens, 3.5. It's great for real estate. I see that used all the time on crop sensor cameras. But so bear with me on this. Think about this for a second. All right. On landscape, you typically want greater depth of field, right? You want everything to be in focus. So, on a full frame camera, if you want everything in focus, let's say you have to shoot at f11 to be able to get the depth of field that you want on a full frame camera. Well, because the sensor is smaller on a crop sensor camera, you automatically get more depth of field, which means you could probably shoot at f4 or maybe f5.6 and get the same depth of field that you would at f11 on a full frame camera, which means, think about this for a second, you're actually getting twice the amount of light into the camera at no cost, meaning you don't have to change the ISO, right? So if you're shooting on a full frame camera at f11 and you're wide open, let's say at f11, you'd have to either slow the shutter way down or turn up the ISO, right? Our whole ISO thing. So you may have to go from 100 to 200 to 400 to 640 or faster to get the same image, right? So therefore people are like, oh, I get more noise, we talked about before. But on a crop sensor camera, because you're already getting that depth of field at 3.5, or roughly, I'm just guessing here, then you don't have to turn up the ISO, which means you're actually getting more depth of field at lower noise and lower ISO settings. It's kind of interesting. I've seen a lot of well-known photographers that shoot landscape use micro Four Thirds cameras. The sensor's even smaller, and that's what I use for video as well, because 4K it works fine. I don't need anything bigger than that. But the reason they do that is because of with a smaller sensor, more depth of field. They don't have to turn up the ISO to be able to get that same resolution or that same noise level. Anyway, so I know it's kind of geeky, but I apologize for that. Every company that I know, every major company makes a crop sensor camera. So it's not like there's some kind of, problem with that. Also, the lenses are less expensive, the cameras are less expensive, so it's a great way to get into photography without spending a lot of money. Also, I should also mention that the full frame camera, the lenses are much more expensive and much bigger and much heavier. So if you're looking for a travel camera, a crop sensor camera would be an advantage. Now, there's companies like Fuji, for example. Fuji doesn't even make a full frame camera. They make a crop sensor camera and a medium format camera. Now, in my opinion, medium format is really full frame. Okay? So next time somebody wants to rub your nose in and go, oh, that's a crop sensor camera, you gotta go full frame. Well, then here's what you want to do. You want to tell them, you can say, oh yeah, I'm thinking about going full frame, but I'm thinking about going medium format. Because medium format is like 4 times bigger than 35 millimeter. So if you look at the blue on the outside, that's how a medium format frame would be. So as you can see, it's actually bigger, or very, very close to the difference between 35 millimeter and an APS-C or a crop sensor. And depends on the camera, but there's a lot of others that have even more so than that. But the point is that if someone's trying to tell you they're thinking about you should go full frame and you don't want to do that, it's up to you, of course. Remember that really that full frame is actually medium format. Medium format is really where full frame is, and if you want to see an amazing image, that is where you want to. That's what you want to really go to. But that's a whole nother issue. That really changes the dynamics. It's a very different camera. I love medium format. This is off the topic, but I'll tell you that medium format has a look about it, and I don't know what it is. I have a suspicion. It's not about specifications. It's not necessarily about sensor size. It's not about resolution. It just has a 3-dimensional quality to it, and it's really phenomenal. So if you ever get a chance to shoot a medium format camera, try it. You will be really, really impressed. Okay. So, and then finally, so let's go over what we've talked about then. We went over shooting on manual. I said shooting on manual is fine. There's a time and a place, but it's not necessary. You don't have to learn to shoot on manual, especially right away. All right. ISO noise, remember, clients or anybody will not see the noise for the most part, but they'll accept a noisy picture because they don't see it, but they will not accept a blurry picture. So if you want the picture to be, blurry, fine. Keep shooting at ISO 100. But shoot at whatever you have to shoot at ISO-wise to get the shot, especially in sports. If you're doing sports for your children or you have kids or something and you're shooting nighttime sports, believe me, it's a nightmare. The fields look like they're well lit, but they're not. So if you have to shoot at ISO 3200 or 6400 or 12800, do it just to get the shot, and then worry about the noise later on. Flash photography, you got to learn it. I mean, it's all about the light, and flash is not just for shooting in dark situations. Okay, there's a lot of other times you want to be able to do that. Resolution, don't stress about pixel peeping. Don't go in and zoom in on your images 200% and say, oh, look how noisy they are, because you're not really looking at the full resolution of an image. Print the image. Look at the images at a 15 foot away, and then to make a determination. So don't be one of these techno pixel peepers, all right? And finally, crop sensor versus full frame. It's use whatever you have. I don't care if you have to use a phone or a medium format camera. The trick is learn to, use the tools you have to do what you need to do, and focus more on the subject and telling a story. I can't stress this enough. that is what's going to make your photography excel faster. You can get more attention for your work, and that is all about the image and not about the technology. So anyway, I hope that was helpful to you guys, and see if we have any last minute questions here, Sue Ann, before we get let's see. One of the negatives, yeah. Well, Taylor, it's I get that. The M50 is not a full frame camera, and it's I think it's a crop sensor camera. I mean, no, it's crop. I know it's not full frame, but my point is, I think it's a APS-C sensor. I should know that, but I don't. But it's, guess what? Here's the advantage to it. It's small, it's lightweight, right? Easy to carry. The lenses are small. You can throw it in a purse or whatever. So there's some advantages definitely about having a smaller camera. I shoot both the Nikon D850, which is a full frame camera, a Nikon D810, but then I also have mirrorless cameras, which are crop sensor. They're not even crop sensor, micro four thirds. Here's one right here. So anyway, and the sensor's even smaller, but for video they're fantastic. And the second thing is they're small, lightweight, and I can carry them easily. I don't have to have a bunch of lenses with me. So it's all about solving the problem. It's not about the gear, believe me. Yes, and I totally get that it's lightweight, and that's a benefit. So. All right, listen, thanks very much. I really appreciate you guys here. It means so much to me that you're here every week. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Hit me up on Facebook or leave a comment here, and I'll be glad to reply. Thanks very much. Have a good evening, and we will see you again next week.